It was supposed to be just another morning at Sterling Academy, a prestigious private school where wealth and status meant everything. Raven Tate hurried down the hallway, her mind occupied with the AP calculus quiz she had in 5 minutes. She wasn't thinking about drama, wasn't looking for trouble, she just wanted to get to class. But fate had other plans. As she turned the corner, she came to an abrupt stop. Standing right in the middle of the hallway, blocking her path like a villain from a bad movie, was Grant Wheeler. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered, and built like a football linebacker. But it wasn't just his size that made him intimidating, it was the way he carried himself, like he owned the place. He was rich, well-connected, and had a nasty habit of making people feel small. Today, his target was Raven. A slow smirk spread across Grant's face as he leaned casually against the lockers, arms crossed over his chest. His voice dripped with mockery as he spoke. Well, he drawled. Looks like someone got lost. You sure you're in the right place, Tate? Around them, students slowed their steps, some stopping entirely. A few exchanged glances, but no one dared to intervene. At Sterling Academy, everyone knew the unspoken rule: if Grant Wheeler decided to pick on someone, you stayed out of it. It was easier that way. Raven tightened her grip on the strap of her backpack, a flicker of irritation flashing in her dark eyes. She had spent too long ignoring his snide comments, pretending his words didn't sting. But today was different. Today, she wasn't in the mood to play along. Taking a steady breath, she met his gaze, her voice cool but firm. Move, Grant. I don't have time for your garbage today. For a brief second, there was silence. Then Grant's smirk widened. He pushed off the lockers, stepping closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. Oh, you think you can talk to me like that? His voice was laced with amusement, but there was something else beneath it, something darker. You don't belong here, Tate. This school isn't for... Before he could finish his sentence, he shoved her. It wasn't a hard shove, just enough to send a message. A warning. A challenge. A mistake. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few students pulled out their phones. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was a show. Raven barely stumbled, but she didn't move back. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, locking eyes with him. There was no fear in her expression, only a quiet, steady confidence. When she spoke, her voice was calm. Too calm. You really don't want to do this, she warned. Grant scoffed. Or what? He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with condescension. You gonna run and cry to a teacher? Go ahead, little girl. This ain't your place. Then he shoved her again. Harder this time. The hallway went dead silent. Raven exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders. All right, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. You asked for it. And in the next second, the entire school would witness something they never saw coming. The moment Grant shoved Raven the second time, a hush fell over the hallway. It wasn't just another act of casual bullying anymore, it was something bigger, something more dangerous. The air was thick with tension, crackling like a wire about to snap. Students who had initially been passive onlookers were now completely absorbed, some frozen in place while others slowly lifted their phones, recording the moment. This wasn't just entertainment anymore, it was a spectacle. Raven didn't move at first. She barely even blinked. She had been shoved, yes, but the impact wasn't what made her heart beat faster. It was the principle of it, the sheer arrogance in Grant's actions, the way he thought he could shove her aside like she was nothing, like she didn't belong. For too long, she had endured it. The offhand remarks in class, the side glances, the whispered jokes behind her back. The way Grant and his privileged little circle acted like Sterling Academy belonged to them, like there was some invisible line that she had crossed just by existing in their space. She had ignored it, endured it, told herself that walking away was the smarter choice. But today, something in her refused to back down. Grant, however, mistook her stillness for fear. he laughed, a deep, smug chuckle that grated against her ears. "What's wrong, Tate?" he taunted, leaning in just a little. His voice was thick with condescension, his grin widening like he had already won. "Cat got your tongue? Go on. Walk away like you always do." But Raven didn't walk away. Slowly, deliberately, she took a step forward. Grant's expression flickered, just for a second. The confidence wavered in his eyes, not gone, but shaken. He hadn't expected that. He had expected her to shrink back, to avoid eye contact, to mutter something under her breath and move along like she always did. But this time, she was stepping toward him, not away. The weight of the crowd pressed in around them. Someone muttered, "Oh, damn," under their breath. The students weren't just watching anymore, they were waiting. Waiting to see if Raven would fight back. She met Grant's gaze head-on, her voice calm, steady. "You think this is funny, don't you?" she asked, her tone devoid of fear. "You think you can push people around, humiliate them, and no one will ever push back?" Grant scoffed, regaining his composure. He tilted his head slightly, a smirk curling at the edges of his mouth. "That's exactly how it works," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Welcome to reality." Raven let out a quiet breath, shaking her head slightly. "No," she murmured. "Not today." And in that instant, as the crowd held its breath, as Grant's smirk wavered once more, something shifted. The balance of power was about to change, and Grant Wheeler had no idea what was coming. The silence that followed the shove was almost deafening. Grant, towering over Raven with his arrogant smirk, seemed to expect her to crumble under his weight. After all, he had been bullying students at Sterling Academy for years, and no one had ever dared to challenge him. His reputation as the untouchable, feared king of the school was well known, and he was used to getting his way. Yet, as the seconds stretched out and Raven didn't back down, something shifted in the air. She dropped her backpack. The soft thud of it hitting the floor was the first sign of what was about to happen. For a brief moment, everything else around them seemed to slow down. The sounds of students whispering, the click of phones being pulled from pockets, all of it faded into the background. Raven's focus was absolute. She wasn't afraid. In fact, she felt more certain than she ever had. Grant's smirk deepened, thinking he had won the mental game. "What's wrong, Tate?" he taunted, the edge of mockery creeping into his voice. "You gonna cry now? Go ahead, little girl. This is what you get for thinking you belong here." His words dripped with contempt, but Raven didn't flinch. Her eyes, locked on his, were calm, almost detached. There was no fear in them. There was only the deep, unshakable knowledge that she wasn't going to let him walk over her anymore. Then, without warning, Raven moved. It was so fast, so smooth that even Grant didn't see it coming. With a swift motion, she grabbed his arm. In one fluid motion, she twisted her body, using the momentum of the crowd around her to power the movement. Grant was caught off guard. His body left the ground in an instant, and before he could even react, Raven flipped him over her shoulder with a precision that would have been impossible to anticipate. There was a sickening thud as Grant hit the floor hard, his body slamming against the polished tiles with a sickening crunch. The sound of his crash echoed through the hallway, louder than any voice could have been. For a moment, everything stopped. Time seemed to freeze as Grant lay there, sprawled on his back, eyes wide in shock. The crowd that had been holding its breath finally let out a collective gasp. Whispers spread like wildfire, then came the shock, followed by disbelief. Grant Wheeler, Sterling Academy's biggest bully, the guy everyone feared, was lying on the floor, utterly defeated. He wasn't just humbled, he was humiliated. His pride, his reputation, his entire sense of self-worth had crumbled in an instant. Raven stood over him, her posture relaxed, as though the entire situation were just another inconvenience. She didn't look down at him with contempt or anger. No, she simply regarded him as someone who had tried to push too far and now had to deal with the consequences. With a calmness that shocked everyone around her, she spoke, her words casual yet full of weight. "Told you." And with that, she stepped over him. There was no victory dance, no mocking laugh. There was only the quiet, confident stride of someone who had just shown the world that she wasn't to be messed with. As Raven walked away, the hallway erupted. Students who had been too scared to even look at her now cheered. Phones were out, capturing every moment, every angle of Grant's defeat. Someone yelled *world star*, as if they were watching a viral fight video. But Raven wasn't concerned with any of that. She was already moving on, already focused on the next thing, because for her, this wasn't about seeking validation. It was about showing that there were consequences to crossing the line. Grant, however, wasn't done. He groaned on the floor, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. His hands balled into fists, his pride bruised but not broken. No, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time, Raven knew that the balance of power had shifted. The crowd no longer feared Grant. They feared her. And as she walked down the hallway, Raven felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: empowerment. She had taken a stand, and for the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt like she belonged. By the time lunchtime arrived, Sterling Academy had been completely overtaken by a fever. The once familiar hum of casual conversations had been replaced by a buzz of excitement that filled every corner of the school. But it wasn't the usual talk about the latest assignment, the upcoming weekend, or the social drama that typically dominated student discussions. No, this was different. The topic on everyone's mind was Raven Tate and the video. It had started as something small, an accidental clip filmed on a student's phone during the confrontation between Raven and Grant. But it didn't stay small for long. In just a matter of hours, that footage was everywhere. Social media platforms exploded with the clip: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. People couldn't stop talking about it. The scene where Raven, calm and collected, had flipped Grant Wheeler, the most feared bully at Sterling Academy, onto the cold, hard floor had taken the school by storm. And soon, it had spread well beyond the walls of the academy, becoming a viral sensation that captured the attention of the entire student body and even the outside world. The video was no longer just a piece of entertainment. It was a symbol. A symbol of something greater. The crowd had witnessed the fall of an untouchable, a king who had ruled Sterling Academy with fear and intimidation for years. Now, that same king was lying helpless on the floor, stunned and humiliated, while Raven stood over him with an air of casual indifference. It was shocking. It was explosive. It was everything that no one had expected. For Raven, the sudden attention was overwhelming. The adrenaline from her confrontation with Grant had faded, leaving her in a strange, unfamiliar position. At first, she didn't know how to process it. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially in a place like Sterling Academy, where the social hierarchy had always kept her in the background. But now, she wasn't just a student who kept her head down. She was the person everyone was talking about, the one who had taken down Grant Wheeler with a single, effortless move. As the school day continued, Raven found herself surrounded by students who had never even looked at her before, suddenly eager to talk to her. "Yo, how did you do that?" one of the boys from her math class asked, his eyes wide with genuine admiration. "You straight up destroyed Grant." Others gathered around, asking about her fighting skills, wanting to know where she had learned to move like that, how she had built the strength to take down someone like Grant. Raven was bombarded with questions, but all she could do was shrug. She wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't a fighter, not really. She had never planned for any of this to happen. But what caught her off guard the most was the look in their eyes. They weren't looking at her with pity, or even disdain. No, these students, some of the same ones who had ignored her or belittled her before, were now looking at her with respect. They were fascinated by her confidence, her ability to stand up for herself, and the sheer power she had displayed in that single moment. Raven was no longer just the quiet girl trying to blend in. She had become something more, something to be feared and admired in equal measure. "I didn't know Raven could fight like that," another student murmured to a friend, disbelief in his voice. But for Raven, all this sudden attention was both exhilarating and unsettling. She didn't crave the spotlight, and she certainly didn't want to become a poster child for defeating the bully. Still, there was no denying the surge of power that came from being recognized in such a way. For so long, she had walked through the halls of Sterling Academy, invisible, unnoticed, and now, for the first time in her life, she felt like she mattered. She had shown everyone, including herself, that she wasn't someone to be underestimated. The excitement over the video continued to grow, and by the next morning, the entire school was obsessed with the footage. It wasn't just the usual school gossip anymore, it was a full-on phenomenon. Students gathered in groups, huddled around their phones, laughing, talking, and sharing the video over and over again. Everyone wanted to see the moment again, the exact moment when Grant Wheeler's reign of terror ended and Raven Tate became the new force to be reckoned with. However, the more the video spread, the more the reality of the situation hit Grant. For years, he had built his reputation at Sterling Academy. He had made sure everyone knew his name, feared his presence, and respected his power. But now, in the blink of an eye, he was a laughingstock. The video was a constant reminder of his defeat. The comments, the memes, the jokes, they all made him seem weak, pathetic. For someone who had spent so much time and energy being on top, it was a crushing blow. Grant seethed. His humiliation wasn't something he could easily forget. He couldn't just let it go. He couldn't allow himself to be reduced to a meme. No. He needed to take back control, to reclaim his status. His mind began to churn with thoughts of revenge. But as much as Grant's anger grew, Raven found herself growing more and more comfortable in her newfound role. As the day wore on, she realized something: this wasn't just a one-time incident. The attention wasn't going to die down. She was no longer just a student trying to get through the school year. She was someone who had changed the dynamic at Sterling Academy. And she didn't plan to back down. By the time the final bell rang, Raven could feel the eyes of the entire school on her. They weren't just curious anymore. They were watching her every move, wondering what she would do next, what other surprises she had up her sleeve. The power had shifted, and Raven Tate had become a symbol of strength, of resilience, and of the unspoken truth that no one, no matter how powerful, was invincible. But Grant Wheeler, humiliated and consumed by rage, wasn't done. He wouldn't rest until he regained what he had lost. The battle was far from over. And as Raven walked through the crowded halls, she knew that, no matter what, she would never be the same. The fever had spread, and it would take more than one flip to end it. By the next morning, the aftermath of Raven's public victory had completely shattered Grant Wheeler's sense of superiority. The day after his humiliating defeat, the halls of Sterling Academy were buzzing with excitement. The viral video of Raven flipping Grant had spread like wildfire, and now, the entire school was obsessed with the moment that had turned their untouchable king into the laughingstock of the academy. The whispers, the laughs, the pointed looks, Grant could feel them all, each one like a dagger aimed at his pride. For years, Grant had meticulously crafted an image of being untouchable, a king among his peers. He was the star athlete, the son of a wealthy family with connections that ensured no one could ever touch him. His reputation was built on his dominance, his ability to intimidate, and his unchallenged position at the top. People feared him. They respected him. And most of all, they knew that crossing him would come with consequences. But now, in the blink of an eye, Raven Tate had stripped all of that away. She had made a fool of him, and no one, least of all Grant, could stand the sting of it. Grant's anger was a slow burn, simmering beneath the surface all through the morning. He tried to act as though it didn't bother him, tried to keep his composure, but the more the students laughed and talked about what had happened, the more his insides churned. This wasn't just a small defeat. It was a challenge to his very identity. And if there was one thing Grant couldn't tolerate, it was being made to look weak. He needed to fix this. The first thing he did was gather his loyal group: Hunter, Mason, and Tyler, 3 of the most obedient members of his inner circle. They were always by his side, his boys, ready to back him up in any situation. Together, they were an unshakable force, and Grant knew that if anyone could help him take Raven down, it was them. With the perfect storm of anger, embarrassment, and a bruised ego swirling inside him, Grant began to hatch his plan. He would have to get even. There could be no other way. He couldn't just walk around like nothing happened. He needed to reassert his dominance, and that meant dealing with Raven once and for all. Grant texted her from an anonymous number, setting up the confrontation, *, meet me at the gym after school. No cameras. Let's settle this, *, he was confident she would come. After all, Raven had never backed down from anything before. This time, though, it would be different. This time, it would be on his terms. The hours between the text and the time for the showdown seemed to drag on endlessly for Grant. His stomach was in knots, the tension growing as the time drew nearer. His plan felt right, but a voice in the back of his mind kept whispering that it could go wrong. What if Raven had something up her sleeve? What if, somehow, she was ready for him this time too? He pushed those thoughts away. He couldn't afford to doubt himself now. This was his chance to fix everything, to remind everyone why they feared him. When the final bell rang and students poured out of their classrooms, Grant was already in the gym with his goons, waiting. The gym was eerily silent, the high ceilings and polished floors reflecting the coldness of his plan. He could almost hear his own heartbeat in the stillness. The minutes felt like hours as he paced, waiting for Raven to show up. Raven, meanwhile, was fully aware of what was happening. She wasn't naive. She had seen the way Grant had looked at her during the day, the cold stares that followed her every move. She knew he wouldn't let this go easily. But Raven wasn't afraid. She had faced down Grant once, and now, she was going to face him again. This time, however, the stakes were higher. The humiliation of yesterday was still fresh in Grant's mind, and he was likely planning something even worse. But Raven had a fire inside her, a determination that refused to let fear take control. She arrived at the gym, and as the door slammed shut behind her, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. She stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room. Grant was there, standing at the front with a smug expression on his face. But it wasn't just him. Behind him stood his 3 loyal followers, Hunter, Mason, and Tyler, each of them towering over her. The odds were stacked against her, but Raven was unshaken. She wasn't intimidated by their size or the fact that it was 4 against 1. She had something they didn't, confidence. Grant sneered as he spoke, his voice dripping with malice. Big mistake coming here, Tate. His tone was filled with spite, a clear message that he thought this was the moment where he could finally make her pay. Raven's expression didn't change. She stood her ground, arms crossed in front of her, looking at him as if she were bored. So, it's 4 against 1 now, she said, her voice cool and calm, almost detached. There was no fear in her eyes, no sign of hesitation. This was just another challenge she was ready to face. Grant's lips twisted into a grin, but it was a grim one. He stepped forward, his body language tense, every inch of him radiating anger. This isn't about being scared, Tate. This is about respect. You need to know your place. Raven didn't flinch. She had heard this line before. She had heard it from people who thought they owned the world, who thought they could decide who deserved respect and who didn't. But Raven wasn't interested in their warped sense of power. She wasn't going to let Grant, or anyone else, dictate her worth. She was beyond that. With that, Grant swung his first punch, a wild, sloppy swing filled with rage. But Raven was ready. She dodged effortlessly, her body moving with practiced precision. She had learned to fight for moments like this. Grant's punch missed by inches, and Raven could feel the desperation in his movements. This is not going to end well for him, she thought. Next, Mason charged at her. But Raven was too fast, too skilled. She ducked and swept his legs out from under him. He fell hard, hitting the ground with a thud. Before he could even recover, Tyler tried to grab her from behind. He didn't stand a chance. With a quick turn, Raven elbowed him sharply in the ribs. The sound of his breath leaving his body echoed in the gym as he staggered back, gasping for air. Hunter hesitated, and that hesitation cost him. Raven spun, delivering a perfect kick to his chest. He flew backward, crashing to the floor. 3 down, 1 to go. Now it was just Grant. His fury was palpable as he charged at her, throwing wild punches with no aim or control. It was the last act of a desperate man trying to cling to whatever dignity he had left. But Raven wasn't interested in playing his game. She dodged each of his punches, each movement smooth and calculated. And then, she struck. With a swift kick to his gut, Grant stumbled back, his breath knocked out of him. Raven grabbed his collar and slammed him into the floor with a force that echoed through the gym. She crouched down beside him, her voice low and dangerous. "Don't ever touch me again." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Grant couldn't ignore. Grant groaned in pain, rolling onto his side as his goons lay sprawled on the floor around him. The silence in the gym was deafening. It was over. He had lost. The next day, the halls of Sterling Academy were filled with whispers about Raven Tate. She had done what no one thought possible. She had taken down Grant Wheeler. No one feared Grant anymore. They feared Raven. And as for Grant, his pride had been broken beyond repair. The world was no longer his to control. It was Raven's now. The tension in the air was thick as Raven stepped through the gym doors, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her chest. After days of avoiding confrontation, the moment had finally arrived. She had been expecting this. Grant Wheeler, the most feared and privileged student at Sterling Academy, had made it clear that he wasn't going to let what happened the day before slide. His ego was shattered, and he would stop at nothing to reclaim his sense of superiority. Raven could feel the eyes of the students who had followed her to the gym on her back, their whispers and hushed conversations just beyond her hearing. They were watching, waiting for the drama to unfold. Yet, Raven's focus remained unbroken. As her sneakers echoed softly on the polished gym floor, her mind was completely centered on the challenge ahead. She knew that this wasn't just a fight. It was about pride. It was about asserting that she wasn't someone to be pushed around, not even by the school's most feared bully. Her mind drifted briefly to the encounter the day before, when she had humiliated Grant in front of the entire school by flipping him over her shoulder with the swift precision of a seasoned fighter. The video of the moment had gone viral, and she had become an overnight sensation at Sterling Academy. Students who had once ignored her now looked at her with admiration, even fear. But Grant? He wasn't just going to let it go. His need for control, for dominance, was too great. As she entered the gym, Raven's gaze locked onto Grant, standing in the center with a twisted sneer on his face. His posture was defensive yet threatening, a picture of arrogance and entitlement. But behind him were his 3 loyal followers, Hunter, Mason, and Tyler. Their presence only confirmed what Raven had feared. This wasn't just about him anymore, this was about his pride, his power. He had to prove that he could put her in her place, no matter the cost. Grant's voice echoed across the gym, his words laced with hatred and a cold determination. "Big mistake coming here, Tate," he sneered, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed her. He stepped forward slowly, his movements predatory, like a wolf stalking its prey. Raven didn't flinch. She stood tall, her posture unwavering, and crossed her arms in front of her, an expression of quiet defiance on her face. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. Her heart was pounding, and her breath was steady, but her mind was in full tactical mode. She had to stay calm. She had to control her emotions. Grant wasn't going to back down, so neither could she. "For against one, huh?" Raven's voice was calm, almost disinterested, as she raised an eyebrow. "You really must be scared of me." Grant's face flushed with rage, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. He didn't like being mocked, especially not by someone like her. "Shut up," he growled, stepping closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't know your place, Tate. I'm going to teach you." Raven could feel the anger rolling off of him like waves, each step he took toward her an attempt to intimidate. But she stood her ground. She wasn't about to let him rattle her. She had been through worse in her life, far worse than a bully who thought he owned the world. She had survived worse than him, and she wasn't about to lose to someone like him now. Without warning, Grant lunged at her, his fist flying in a wide arc. But Raven was ready. With an almost predatory grace, she sidestepped his attack, her movements fluid and precise. Grant's punch missed by mere inches, and she could see the shock in his eyes as he stumbled slightly, thrown off balance. Raven's confidence surged. Grant was wild. He was angry, but he was sloppy, his attacks fueled by emotion rather than skill. She could see it in the way he fought, no control, no strategy, just pure aggression. And that was his downfall. Before he could recover, Mason charged at her, his bulk an advantage he tried to use against her. Raven didn't even flinch. She twisted her body, her foot sweeping underneath Mason's legs, and sent him crashing to the floor with a sickening thud. His body hit the gym floor with a loud slap, and he groaned in surprise, disoriented by the sudden loss of control. Next, Tyler tried to take advantage of Raven's momentary focus on Mason, lunging from behind, but Raven was one step ahead. She dropped low, using her elbow to strike him in the ribs with brutal precision. The crack of the impact reverberated through the gym, and Tyler staggered back, gasping for air, clutching his side in pain. By now, Hunter, the largest of the group, was hesitating. His hesitation was his fatal mistake. Raven didn't waste a moment. She spun quickly, her legs swinging out in a swift arc, catching Hunter square in the chest. The force of the kick sent him crashing backward, his body slamming against the gym floor with an almost comical thud. Now, with only Grant left standing, Raven allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. She had taken down 3 of his goons without breaking a sweat. Grant, on the other hand, was growing increasingly desperate. His face was twisted in a mask of fury, and his breathing was heavy and labored. He wasn't used to being defeated. Not like this. Not by someone like her. Grant's anger flared as he rushed toward her, throwing wild punches, but Raven was no longer just dodging. She was anticipating his every move, moving with the fluidity of someone who had practiced this thousands of times before. His swings were wild and uncontrolled, each one a desperate attempt to regain his pride, but Raven was a step ahead, reading his every move. Then, in a single, lightning-fast movement, Raven delivered a powerful kick to Grant's stomach. The impact left him breathless, his eyes wide with shock as he staggered back. Before he could react, Raven closed the distance between them, grabbing his collar and slamming him hard into the gym floor. The sound of his body hitting the ground was deafening in the quiet gym, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Raven crouched beside him, her eyes cold and unwavering. "Don't ever touch me again," she said, her voice low and dangerous. It was a warning, one that Grant would never forget. Grant groaned, struggling to push himself up, but the fight was over. His goons lay motionless on the floor around him, defeated and humiliated. Raven stood, brushing herself off as if the fight had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. She adjusted her backpack and walked over Grant's fallen body as if he were nothing but a speed bump. By the time Raven left the gym, she had won more than just a physical fight. She had solidified her place at Sterling Academy. The next morning, the school was buzzing with talk of the fight. The video had gone viral, and Raven's reputation had skyrocketed. No one feared Grant anymore, they feared Raven. And as for Grant, his ego had been crushed, and his reputation lay in ruins. He had learned the hard way that there are some people you just don't mess with. Raven Tate stood in the middle of the gym, every muscle in her body poised, waiting for the storm to arrive. The gym, with its high ceilings and championship banners, usually echoed with the sounds of victory and team spirit. But tonight, it felt different. The air was thick with tension, as if the very building was aware of the showdown taking place within its walls. The lights above flickered ever so slightly, casting long shadows across the floor, adding to the feeling that something monumental was about to happen. Raven's calmness was like a quiet before a storm, while the chaos brewing around her was like thunder in the distance. Grant Wheeler had made a grave mistake, thinking that he could break her. She had already taken him down once, in front of the entire school, and now, he was back for more. He had brought his loyal sidekicks, Hunter, Mason, and Tyler, to ensure that this time, Raven would be the one to fall. But Raven wasn't afraid. In fact, as she stood in front of him, she felt an odd sense of calm. She wasn't just fighting for her pride or to defend herself. She was fighting for something bigger, something that went beyond just winning or losing. She was fighting for her place in the world, for the right to stand tall, and for the truth that had become clear to her. True strength isn't about physical power or dominance, it's about the ability to control yourself and stand firm in the face of adversity. Grant, however, was not calm. His face was twisted with rage, his fists clenched in frustration. The humiliation from yesterday still stung, and he couldn't stand the idea that Raven had shattered his image, the one he had worked so hard to build. This wasn't just about a fight anymore, it was about regaining his reputation, his control, his place as the king of Sterling Academy. And he was determined to do whatever it took to crush Raven's spirit and prove that she had no place here. His eyes were full of fury as he took a step forward, but Raven was already one step ahead. The moment Grant swung at her, it was almost as if everything slowed down. Raven didn't panic. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she twisted her body to the side, effortlessly dodging his sloppy, wild punch. She had seen enough to know what was coming. Every movement felt natural, like second nature. The energy around her hummed with focus as she stepped into the fight, fully aware of the stakes but unbothered by the pressure. Grant's fury only intensified as Mason rushed in to help. But Raven was already on top of things. She swept Mason's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor with a single swift motion. He didn't even know what hit him. The crowd around the gym had begun to gather, sensing that something incredible was unfolding, but Raven's attention was solely on the fight at hand. Her movements were sharp, controlled, and precise. She wasn't wasting energy on unnecessary moves. Tyler, another of Grant's loyal followers, tried to grab her from behind. But Raven had anticipated this. She quickly spun around, elbowing him hard in the ribs, the sharp crack of her strike echoing in the silence of the gym. Tyler staggered backward, gasping for air, completely taken off guard. The thrill of the fight was nothing compared to the satisfaction of proving to herself that she was in control. Only Hunter remained, but his hesitation was telling. It was clear he wasn't sure what to do next. Grant, now frenzied with rage, had lost all control. His punches were sloppy, fueled by pure emotion rather than skill. Raven, however, was calm, calculating. She dodged each of his wild swings, her body moving with fluid precision, until the moment finally came. In an instant, her leg shot out, kicking Grant square in the chest. He stumbled back, crashing into the floor with a loud thud. But Raven didn't stop there. She wasn't done proving her point. She moved forward, grabbing Grant by the collar and slamming him into the gym floor. His face, once full of arrogance and pride, was now twisted in pain, his breath coming in short gasps. Raven leaned down, her voice a low, deadly whisper, "Don't ever touch me again." The words were not just a warning, they were a declaration. In that moment, Raven had claimed her strength, her power, and her right to be who she was without fear or hesitation. The gym was silent. Grant lay there, defeated and humiliated, while his 3 goons lay sprawled out around him, nursing their wounds. The crowd, who had been watching the fight unfold, exploded into cheers and applause. But Raven didn't need their validation. She didn't need anyone to tell her how strong she was. She already knew. As she walked away from the fallen group, her head held high, Raven felt a quiet sense of pride. Not because she had defeated Grant and his goons, but because she had proven something much more important to herself. True strength wasn't about overpowering others or ruling with fear. It was about staying calm, staying true to yourself, and never allowing anyone to break you. Raven Tate wasn't just strong. She was unshakable. The next morning, as Raven walked through the halls of Sterling Academy, the whispers had changed. No longer were people talking about Grant Wheeler, the powerful bully of the school. They were talking about Raven. They spoke of her strength, her calm, and the fact that she had stood up to a force that many before her had feared. She had earned their respect, not by fighting with rage, but by standing firm, showing grace under pressure, and demonstrating that sometimes, true strength lies in being able to walk away from a fight when you've already won. The morning after the gym showdown, a quiet tension lingered in the air as Raven Tate walked down the hallways of Sterling Academy. The usual hum of chatter was different today. The whispers and murmurs that followed her were not full of mockery or doubts, as they often were when Grant Wheeler had been the subject of their conversations. Now, there was something more, a mixture of admiration, awe, and a hint of fear. It wasn't just the students' voices that had shifted. The entire atmosphere in the school felt altered. The power dynamics at Sterling Academy had irreversibly changed, and Raven was now at the top of the pyramid. Raven walked with a calm, collected demeanor, but inside, she felt the weight of her actions from the previous day settle heavily on her shoulders. Grant Wheeler, once the ruler of the school's social hierarchy, had been humiliated in front of everyone. Not just physically defeated, but broken in spirit. She had stripped him of the control he'd held over the students, and there was no going back for him now. In the moment after she flipped him to the floor in the gym, Raven hadn't fully processed the scale of her own actions. But as she moved through the halls, the stares, the nods of approval, and the increasing number of people who came up to her to express their awe were a clear signal. Raven Tate had become the new symbol of power at Sterling Academy. At first, she didn't know how to feel. The victory over Grant, while satisfying, had left her feeling unsettled. She had always been the quiet student, the one who kept her head down and avoided attention. Now, she was the center of it all. Everywhere she turned, students looked at her with a mixture of respect and apprehension. They were no longer fearful of Grant, they were fearful of what Raven might do if they crossed her. The videos of her flipping Grant had gone viral overnight, plastered across every social media platform, turning her into an overnight sensation. The hashtags #RavenTate and #GrantDestroyed trended across Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. While some students saw her as a hero, others saw her as a threat. But Raven didn't care about the attention. She didn't care about being famous. She only cared about one thing: reclaiming the respect that people like Grant had always thought they could demand through wealth, arrogance, and intimidation. She had always known that her true power was something more silent, more controlled. And now, people were seeing that power for what it truly was. Not through grand gestures or displays of strength, but through the ability to stand her ground, to stay calm in the face of adversity, and to fight back when necessary. What unsettled Raven the most, however, was how her newfound power seemed to come with a price. While students approached her in admiration, they also hesitated, as though unsure how to interact with her now. She was no longer just another student at the academy. She had become a symbol, and that symbol was intimidating. The subtle distance she felt from her classmates made her wonder if she would ever be able to have a normal conversation with them again. People didn't look at her the same way they had before. She wasn't just Raven, the girl who kept to herself. Now, she was Raven Tate, the girl who took down Grant Wheeler, the king of the school. That kind of fame didn't come without its challenges. Grant Wheeler, on the other hand, had been dealt a crushing blow. His reign of terror at Sterling Academy was over. The fall from power had been swift and brutal. The same students who once scrambled to stay on his good side now avoided him, afraid of being associated with the loser, the joke. Videos of his humiliation were shared among the student body, and he had become the target of ridicule. Even his closest friends, the ones who had always blindly followed him, were now questioning their loyalty. No one had ever dared to stand up to Grant like Raven had, and now that he had been brought low in such a public and humiliating way, he was no longer feared. The King of Sterling was nothing more than a figure of fun. The respect he had spent years building was gone, swept away in an instant. Despite his defeat, Grant couldn't accept the reality of his fall from grace. His sense of entitlement, his belief that he could control everything and everyone, had been shattered. Raven hadn't just beaten him physically, she had taken everything from him. His reputation, his power, and his influence had all crumbled. It was too much for him to bear. The humiliation cut deeper than any physical wound could. And so, his rage began to brew, growing into something darker. He could not, would not, let this slide. He needed to regain his power, to restore his position as the top dog at Sterling, no matter the cost. As the day passed, Raven began to sense that something was amiss. Grant's usual arrogance had been replaced with a bitter silence, and the way he watched her from a distance made her uneasy. She couldn't ignore the fact that, although she had defeated him, the battle was far from over. Grant Wheeler wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly, and she knew that he would come for her again. Raven wasn't afraid, but she had to be cautious. She couldn't afford to underestimate him, not now, not when she had become the very person he wanted to destroy. By lunchtime, the school buzzed with talk of the previous day's events. Raven's name was on everyone's lips, and the once feared Grant was the subject of ridicule. But Raven felt an unfamiliar weight settle on her chest. People now saw her as something different, something more dangerous. And while that should have felt empowering, it felt isolating. She had risen to the top, but the view from here was lonely. As Raven walked the halls, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of inevitability. She had won the fight, but the war for power at Sterling Academy was far from over. And when the next challenge came, she would face it head-on, knowing that true power wasn't just about defeating others, it was about standing firm when the world tried to tear you down. In the end, Raven Tate had proven that power could be earned through strength, but it also came with the responsibility of never allowing anyone to take it from you. And though the students of Sterling Academy would fear her from this day forward, it was because she had shown them all that there was a new order in town. No longer would they be ruled by the rich and the arrogant. No longer would they bow to the bullies. Now, it was Raven who held the power, and she would ensure that no one ever forgot that again.